There was this explosion about this interview that Bernie Sanders gave the New York Daily News. You know, they give these editorial board news things. And literally, I mean, I didn't have a chance to read it yesterday. Jonathan Capehart. 9 things Bernie Sanders should have known about but didn't in that Daily News interview. The Daily News is I know where his
banking expert Jonathan Capehart.
Right. But if you just Google New York Daily News Bernie interview, just doing this, I don't know. It comes up with like Sanders feeling media heat after new interview. 9 things Bernie Sanders should have known. The New York Daily Bernie Sanders interview is, let's see, what is it saying? Was pretty close to a disaster. This New York Daily News is, let's see, what else?
Bernie got schlonged.
Yeah, I mean, it goes on.
No,
Did Bernie Sanders botch an interview? He takes heat for Daily News. Hit hard for Daily News thing. Bernie Sanders fails disaster interview with New York Daily News. I mean, it goes on and on. I read the interview, and the only thing that I found was even problematic was the position that he's continued to hold in terms of gun manufacturers' liability. And I think that's been a pretty clear and I think well-known controversial issue that he holds. But the rest of it is not just not a disaster, but seems to be completely accurate. I mean, the facile way of saying this is the headline should be Bernie Sanders doesn't explain positions he holds as well as Hillary Clinton explains positions she doesn't hold in terms of holding the banks accountable. But the fact is, he did a perfectly legitimate and more than legitimate. It's the Daily News that doesn't seem to know what they're talking about, or those people who got the message, we're going to hit Bernie Sanders on this to make that argument that he's not practical, it's all pie in the sky. Mike Consul, who is by no means I don't want to say by no means, but has been pretty critical of Bernie Sanders on a lot of things. I mean, he's not the only one who also put this out. I mean, Zach Carter had a similar from Huffington Post.
Ryan Grimm, I think, has a new thing up as well.
Yeah. The issues that people seem to be talking about are breaking up the big banks. And Bernie Sanders apparently, supposedly, doesn't know. They were laughing at Bernie Sanders' plan to pass to break up the big banks. And according to Consul, there's really 3 ways that we can break up the banks. One is statutorily, put some sort of cap on the size of a balance sheet of a financial company. Sherrod Brown has an example of that, the Safe Banking Act, generally proposed to be about 2 or 3% of GDP. Have the Council of Regulators, known as the Financial Stability Oversight Council, chaired by the Treasury Secretary, declare the largest firms to be too risky and must be broken up. That's Section 121 of Dodd-Frank. The first one would also work via Dodd-Frank. And the third is have the Federal Reserve, along with the FDIC, determine that the living wills of the biggest banks are not credible and thus must be broken up by Section 165D. I'm sorry, the first would work through Congress. The last 2 would be Dodd-Frank. So in other words, there's 3 different ways in which you can break up the big banks. So when the Daily News says, do you think the Fed has that authority? And Sanders said, well, I don't know if the Fed has it, but the administration can have it. In other words, the Fed has to be pushed along with the FDIC, and the Fed has to be pushed by the administration to make that determination about the living wills. Sanders apparently is more interested in the Section 121, which is having the Financial Stability Oversight Council declare that the largest firms are too risky and must be broken up. And the how in which you do this is, and this would probably work the same way for the first one, where you declare that statutory cap on how big they can be. You say to the banks, we have assessed your balance sheet. You're too big. We're going to give you 180 days, 60 days, 90 days, however many days, to come up with a plan which you must submit to us, to this board, to this regulatory agency that is empowered by this legislation, to tell us how you're going to get under that cap. How are you going to break up in such a way that you will not run afoul of this too big to fail edict, law, regulation, whatever it ends up being. And then the banks will pursue it in a way that is most profitable for them, but one in which puts them under this cap so they are not a systemic risk. So they're not a risk to the economy. That's the issue here. The issue isn't we're going to keep the banks from being too profitable in some specific way or another way. It's just we don't want the banks to control, any given bank, to control so much money or trading or leverage that it fundamentally makes our entire financial system unstable. That's the point here. So Daly knows, like, where would the investing go? Where would there be a consumer bank? Sanders says, I'm not running JP Morgan or Chase or Citibank. In other words, Sanders knows how this is going to go. We tell the bank, you need to get under this size. How you do it is your business. Just come back to us with what your plan is. We sign off. And the Daily News says, no, but you'd be breaking up the bank. Sanders says, that's right. And it's their decision as to what to do and how they want to do it. Reconfigure themselves. That's the right way to go about it, frankly, and it's also correct. But the New York Daily News and these morons are saying, like, he's going to let the banks break themselves up. Yeah. The issue isn't how they break up. The issue is whether or not they are forced to break up.
That's the story of so much of this campaign now. It's always like, ha, he doesn't get it.
Exactly.
Oh, wait.
I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't. So,
and then they ask him about the
MetLife
MetLife court decision, which is where a judge, a Bush-appointed judge, determined that under Dodd-Frank, MetLife was not considered too big to fail and was not subject to certain requirements that would have been imposed upon it by I think it's the SEC. And they asked him, like, what about this decision? And Sanders said, well, that's something I have not studied, honestly, the legal implications of that. And there's a reason why he hasn't studied it. Is it because he's lazy? No, it's because still today, the ruling is sealed. So we don't know what the opinion is.
That's no
excuse. So there's no way to know.
He doesn't know how to get things done.
And then the issue of criminal convictions. The idea, like, what would you have charged them with, these bankers? And he says, I don't know. I'm not a prosecutor. There was fraud there. I don't know the exact statute, is what they said. And they're like, can you believe it? He's all about prosecuting these bankers, and he doesn't know what the exact statute is. And I think Consul makes the point. Is there anybody who's listening to the sound of my voice who's not a prosecutor or a law enforcement official who can tell me what the statute is that makes murder illegal?
In fairness, though, I think he was being a little coy because the charge will be being bourgeoisie counter-revolutionaries. And when we have show trials and Marxist courts,
in other words, you're
they'll
saying
be summarily executed,
right.
and I don't think
There's
he feels
no statute.
comfortable.
There's
yeah.
no existing statute.
Yeah, we're not.
I mean, that's the point.
We're Marxist legal scholars here.
Everyone knows, most people should know, that the reason why that was given by the Justice Department and the USAs across the country, why they did not pursue, and attorney generals, why they did not pursue criminal charges against these bankers and Wall Street types was because there was a concern that they couldn't win, and they didn't want to expend the resources there. And then there's also that time that Lenny Brewer said, well, they're too big to jail. We don't want to undermine and destroy a company where a lot of people would lose their jobs. Even putting that aside, the issue wasn't that prosecutors didn't know what statute to prosecute these people with. It was they were risk averse. And every administration enters in and basically says to the Justice Department, or the president appoints a attorney general who determines how risk averse they will be in certain areas. So a Bernie Sanders attorney general will be less risk averse in that area. That's the way this works. So you have the New York Daily News pretending they're adults, and then a bunch of hacks, frankly, pretending they're adults too. And that if Bernie Sanders says this thing, he should have more specifics. There are no more specifics. This is actually exactly what you would want from a president. Now, there's no way that Hillary Clinton could answer these questions with more specificity because she doesn't agree with the policy positions that Sanders has. She's just not going to be as aggressive with Wall Street. That's a fact. That's simply a fact. And you can say, well, I don't think we should be more aggressive with Wall Street. The financialization of our country and our economy is good, and these guys know what they're doing, and I mean, that's an argument that you can have. But the idea that he's not giving the specifics he should. No, he's giving exactly the specifics.
Very good understanding it. Read Tim Geithner's book. Tim Geithner is very transparent about this stuff. And he does support, he voices support for Dodd-Frank. He certainly thinks that there needed to be some greater regulation of the financial markets. But fundamentally, he thinks that financial services and financial products are a major boon to the American economy, and they should not be tightly regulated and certainly not broken up.
You don't want to inhibit innovation.
You don't want to stifle innovation. Apparently, innovation is better for mortgages than filmmaking. But regardless, he outlines some of the debates inside the administration. If you want to understand where the Clinton perspective is coming from in an intellectually honest way, read Tim Geithner's book.
Hi, I'm Sam Seder, and this is an Ann Coulter doll.
You should not be immigrating here. Yeah. Stay in your country and hate us.
For smart progressive talk and a little bit of this and even a little bit of that.
Mission accomplished.
Subscribe to our podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and like us on Facebook to get some of our best video clips.